First, I just want to have everybody give a great round of applause for all the presenters today. I think they've done a great job so far. This has been a really, really interesting presentation. I can't wait for the mental health component. I'm the last to speak about nutrition, and I'm supposed to be speaking about my practical experience, which is, oh my gosh, back to the 90s? Like early 1990s, I started nutrition counseling. And so I've been in the game for a long time. So before I get into my practical, indulge me for a couple minutes, because I want to take us through a quick ride through history. Where did it all start? It goes back to the ancient world. Have you guys heard that quote before? Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food? Hippocrates from over 3,000 years ago. We're going to circle back to that and show you how, in the absence of any science, how on the right track the people from the ancient world were. But we are going to jump into the 18th century. Antoine Laurent de Lavoisier. I'm sorry if I screwed that up. If anybody knows French, I may have botched that. But it was at this time we just realized that our bodies actually combust like an engine. We didn't know that. We knew there was this weird relationship between what we ate and how we felt, but we didn't really have the mapping or the science to really understand it until this guy finally figured it out. Elizabeth Newswell, the science historian, said it was a basis for determining what someone needs to survive, what leads to weight gain, what leads to weight loss, what enables physical labor, and what the relationship between food and labor actually is. I guess I can read off this monitor. So imagine what a breakthrough that was. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. If I'm tired, I could eat a little more food. If I want to lose some weight, now I can try to subtract some food. And again, not that long ago. So we had a couple devices that came out in the 19th century, the Collie apparatus. We were first able to dissect carbohydrate. We were trying to figure out what it is, and now we can understand what it is in the food, and we can dissect it, and we can look at it, and we can figure out the mechanics and the chemistry of a carbohydrate. We move on to the respirations apparatus, which then allowed us to understand protein. And that's a pretty big machine there. So what they tried to do is mimic what goes on inside the body through that machine, and then figure out how to, what is protein, how do you actually extract it? So these were the inventions that kept moving the science of nutrition forward, which, by the way, is a nascent technology. It's only about, a nascent science, only about 100 years old or so. So we take this for granted, because there's so much nutrition information out there now. This is all pretty recent. All that technology led to the bomb calorimeter. Raise the hands. You guys have ever heard of that? Yeah. It's how we determine calories. We take a piece of food, we put it in, it burns, we determine the level of energy expenditure, and we say, okay, this is X amount of calories. So these are all recent technologies. So the micronutrients, the minerals we knew, because they're part of, the table of elements. The vitamins were pretty new. This is, again, a pretty recent thing we take for granted. We go out, we buy vitamin supplements, right? We really didn't know what was going on until recently. This guy is considered the father of vitamins, Casimir Funk, Polish chemist, the father of vitamin therapy. And really what vitamins, when they came on the scene, it was really understanding the history of the discovery of vitamins is the history of their deficiency diseases. So while they were trying to figure out why do people have scurvy, why do people have beriberi, they found out it was a lack of certain nutrients within the food that they were trying to dissect and figure out what these things actually were. Vital amines. They found an amine group on the carbon structure, the chemical structure, and they said, oh, this is interesting. This is not something we see all the time. And they found out we have to get a lot of this exogenously from the outside. Our body doesn't seem to manufacture it. But when we give people this thing, these conditions, these diseases seem to disappear. So they took the amine group and the term vital, crunched them together, and that's where we get the term vitamins today. They were vital amines. If you guys don't know, these are your basic conditions that have been pretty much ameliorated at this point. Beriberi, scurvy. I'm sure you guys have all heard of these by now, right? Very easy fixes with just a little bit of vitamins, nothing you even need to take a supplement for. You just need to consume the food that has them, and boom, they're gone. So this really moved the needle forward in terms of our understanding. Vitamin C was another big one that came along. Hungarian scientist Albert Szent-Győri isolated it from adrenal gland from an animal, because again, we don't manufacture it, so we have to get it externally. And Oh, there we go. Could do it from here. All right. And then Dr. Linus Pauling. Anybody ever heard of Linus Pauling? Yeah, he took the whole vitamin C thing to the next level. He was the one who really did a lot of research on it. He himself won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for it, looked in terms of vitamin C in the common cold, vitamin C and its role in cancer prevention. Somebody worth looking into if you're into the history of all this. So now we have all this information. Now we understand macronutrients. Now we understand micronutrients. So now the government's trying to figure this all out, put it together in a way that's coherent for all of us. So back in 1943, the Basic 7 Food Guide. There were rations back then because it was World War II. So they had to figure out what's the minimum amount of nourishment that somebody's going to need to get through the day. They weren't exploring what's the amount you need for optimal health and wellness, which is where we're at today. But back then, it was simply just, we have soldiers in the field, we have people back at the home front, and we need to generate a lot of calories. Like, how do we do this? What's the most efficient way of doing it? So this was the first iteration of what we consider the food guide pyramid. Right after that, in 1955, the Daily Food Guide. Just another explanation of it. We all know this one. Doctor, you mentioned it before, 1992, the Food Guide Pyramid. This is a big game changer released by the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture. Very, very heavy in carbohydrates. There's a lot of controversy about, right these days about whether that's appropriate or not. That's a whole other lecture. But this came out, and this is how we started parsing out our food back in 1992. Up until 2005, where they finally included exercise. They finally put somebody up there to at least represent the fact that you need to move in addition to eat well. And then, if you guys don't know, this is pretty much our current iteration, my plate. So they took it off the idea of a pyramid, and now they actually put it onto a plate because it's a lot more identifiable, because we all eat off of plates, and we just say, okay, this is the way we should parse it out at this point. All right, now into the practitioner part of it. How do you put this all together, right? It's a relatively nascent science. We don't know a whole lot about it. We're trying to figure out its role and how we can counsel people to make the most out of this nutrition information. And this is one of our biggest problems today. I don't know if you know this, but physicians receive on average 19.6 hours. And that's on the high side. A lot of them get much less. Some of them don't get any at all. It was very surreal for me to finish my dietetics degree and realize in 5 years I had more information on nutrition than a doctor, yet the doctors take the Hippocratic Oath, which was also penned by Hippocrates, first do no harm. So we're following in his footsteps, yet their net knowledge of nutrition is, I don't even know how to say it, it's dim. It's watered down. It's ridiculous that they don't get exposed to more of this. Now it's a lot more inclusive. Now, as a nutrition person, you have to understand sleep. You have to understand recovery. You have to understand metabolism. You have to understand the gut biome. The expanse of it has really grown because we have a lot more information. We have a lot more knowledge. So it's not as easy as it was back in the days. And hormonal regulation, that's a big one too. And I've taken classes in all these, and it's hard to sort of coordinate it all together. These are some of the modern concerns. FODMAP. Anybody heard of FODMAP? Anybody on FODMAP diet? Okay, good. Metabolic syndrome, gluten sensitivity, general food allergies, oxalates, which is not listed there. But now these are all things that you have to consider on the intake of nutrition counseling, because these are just things that are affecting us and impacting us now that they never impacted us in the past. There's a whole theory, maybe, reasons as to why that is. We're seeing diseases, we're seeing metabolic disorders, we're seeing conditions that we didn't see as readily 30 years ago, or maybe we did and we didn't know how to identify them. Whatever the case is, it's a much more broader palette now, by which we have to, suss through all this information and help the client figure it out. And the diets, paleo, back in like the late 80s, 90s, you were either vegetarian or you weren't. Those are pretty much your two options, right? Now you have paleo, Mediterranean, ketogenic, vegetarian, vegan, carnivore, fasting, which is a diet that doesn't involve any food. So it's like, now it's getting like a lot more intense in terms of what you have to wrestle with. Anybody hear of the carnivore diet? By raise of hands. Anybody know, anybody? It's just where you eat meat. And that's all you eat. No vegetables, no starch, no potatoes, no nothing. And that's something that you have to sort of contend with now when people walk through your door, because its popularity has really expanded because people who had very severe autoimmune conditions found a lot of relief just eating meat, just going on a pure meat diet. And I mean meat with a pinch of salt, and that's it, and water, right? So there's no data on this. We have a lot of data on the Mediterranean diet. We have very, very little to none on the carnivore diet, except anecdotal, except for how it makes people feel. So it'll be very interesting to keep your eye on that one. Fasting is fasting. Everybody's heard the term intermittent fasting. Everybody's kind of familiar with it. So that's another strategy in the whole nutrition canon. So what is the science and art of nutrition counseling? Right? It is a science, it is an art. Your science is your science. It's the accumulative data that keeps coming out. And that's almost like if you were an artist, that's your palette. You have all those different colors to choose from, all those data points. The artistic part of it is working with the client and figuring out what works for them. And if something does work for them, you got to make sure that they're maybe like, hey, carnivore works for me. It's like, yeah, well, you're going to be deficient in all these minerals and vitamins, so we need to figure that out too, right? So it's just about helping them get to the point where they can navigate their diet and navigate their nutrition without compromising their health over the long term. And that gets very, very tricky when things like the carnivore diet and extreme fasting comes out where there's very little science on it. Begins with listening. It really does. And this took me a while. Because when your head is filled with all data, you just want to vomit over the client, right? But you have to change that and understand that it's all about listening, because they will tell you everything you need to know in great detail if you know what to ask and if you are listening. If you're completely listening, unobstructed by any of your internal dialogue. So the whole thing was labeled back to basics. And there really is a foundational understanding of basic things you should be doing before we even start going down deeper roads. Are you eating whole foods? Right? Huberman says this all the time. It's, eat meat, eat fish, eat potatoes. Like, just don't eat anything that comes out of a wrapper. Right? Not an easy thing to do. But nevertheless, the more whole your food is and the less processed it is, we know that has great long-term benefit. The processed foods, the long-term consumption of processed foods has done a lot of damage to us. Because back in the day, you had grains, which people would normally eat grains, but then you had the creation of the steel mill, and that allowed the grains to be processed, and that allowed the glycemic index of things you would normally eat to just skyrocket, go right out the roof. So there's something in the processing that really denatures and devalues your food. And you always see Kellogg's or whatever it is, we added vitamin D, we added vitamin C, right? It's because they stripped it out to begin with. And so they're trying to be like all noble and say, hey, look at, it's fortified. It's fortified because you actually removed all the important stuff to begin with in the processing. Are you hydrated? Raise your hands today. How many of you have drank enough water? Yeah, right? That's such a simple fix, especially as you get older and work with the geriatric population, because they are just epidemically not hydrated. So that's a good thing to just foster as right now when you're nice and young, to just develop these habits. Keep drinking water. It doesn't cost you anything. It just costs you a little time. Are you eating clean? We mentioned that before. Are you just eating, clean cuts of fish? Ideally, your vegetables are organic if that's possible. Just make sure you're not eating a lot of processed foods or bringing in things to your cooking. For example, like vegetable oils. We don't know how much vegetable oils we're getting in foods that we eat out. If you control your food and you eat at home and you prepare your own food, you have a lot more say in what goes in there. Are you getting enough movement? We're all ACSM, so we understand this. Exercise is medicine. It's a vital, vital part. And are you managing your stress? And that's a really big one too. And stress management, because we all know if you're not managing your stress, if you're not sleeping well, all of that is eventually going to inhibit your ability to lose weight long term. So all of these have to be addressed before we even start going in to the deeper stuff. And that's what nutrition counseling has really, really become. It's become a little less scientific and a little more habit-based. Are you drinking enough water? Right? I won't let a client move to the next level until we master that, until we get that down, right? And that may take a week, that may take 2 weeks. But it's if you're really taking your time and you want to cement long-term good habits, they don't change overnight. The worst thing you can do, and I was guilty of this, is just throw a lot of information at people and expect that they're just going to know what to do with it, how to parse it out, how to figure it out, and they don't. So you really need to just walk them through it very methodically. Another profound habit that we teach a lot is eating slowly. If you can master eating slowly, you've already done a lot in terms of your weight management long term, because there are signals, hormonal signals in your brain that go to your gut and tell you you're hungry, you're full, and it usually takes a certain amount of time, 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever it is, and you can eat a lot of calories in that small window of time before your body starts saying, okay, we're good, right? So eating slowly helps you sort of calibrate the volume of food that's actually coming in. So it's these types of habits that nutrition counseling today has really become. It's really become more of a psychological project than it is a scientific project. Because food is interesting, right? You do this long enough, you realize that food touches everything. Your religion, your upbringing, your culture, your family. You ask somebody to, remove something that's not good for them, and that goes back to deep childhood memories that were really good, and you feel like you've just offended them, right? So food is just so immersed in our lives in so many ways, and then there's stress eating. A lot of people just eat because they're stressed. So all these are hot habits that can be transcended. I see it every day in the people I coach. It just takes a little time. It doesn't happen overnight. Blood testing, that's become more crucial. Back in the day, it was just sort of like, go exercise, go do your thing. Some people need more measurement because they may be doing the basics and they may not be getting where they want to go, or they may chronically be tired. So you need to sort of understand where you're going. Do they have a pre-existing medical condition? Do they have hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism? Right? These are all things that are important to know. But it's important to know what the levels are. Vitamin D levels, calcium levels. And these are very simple tests. Because you're not just what you eat, ultimately you're what you absorb. And the doctor was talking about the gut biome earlier. If you're eating a nutrient-dense diet, but you're constantly under stress, you're not going to absorb the nutrients from that as readily as if you are in a relaxed state. Hence the habit, eat slowly. It's not rocket science, but old habits die hard. And if you are not understanding that you could be eating a lot of calories and absorbing very little nutrients out of them, that becomes a whole exploration, and that's, to a certain extent outside of my domain. Then you would punt them to a doctor. Create a diet. This is it, right? This is the formula of it all. Look at what their lives are like. How much activity are they getting? How much stress are they under? You need to understand the whole picture of the person before you start ascribing a diet. And you just need to do it very calculating and very meticulously, because you want to make sure that you're not giving them anything that's going to harm them, make them feel tired or exhausted, because a lot of people now have Food allergies, reactions to food that affect them profoundly. Gluten is the most common one, but people react to food for a variety of different reasons. Suggest supplements for deficiencies. That's an easy fix for the most part. If they are running low on vitamin D or calcium, you can either increase that volume in their food intake, or you can get a high-quality multivitamin to make up for that deficit. Vitamin D, especially this time of year, as we get into the winter, even if you're out in the sun, it's not the same kind of sun that you get in the summer. So most people will run a deficiency of vitamin D in the wintertime, regardless of how much you're actually outdoors. Managing your food from home. This is like one of the most important things that I find on teaching. And it took me 20 years to get there myself. It really did. But now I don't leave the house until I've cooked and prepared, and then I eat again when I go home. And if I want to take snacks with me, I just, I pack something. Gone are my days, personally, and I did it for a long time, of just always being on the run and grabbing things where I could. I'm very much in control because I don't want to be taking in excessive vegetable oils, given what we know about them and their impact on our body. So the more you can control your food intake, and I tell you, it's a good feeling. I know it might be harder for you students because you're always on the run. You're just like, where am I going to find that time? But again, it's a habit. And it's a good habit that if you learn now when you're young and you foster it throughout the decades, it will serve you well, I promise. Eating slow, preparing your own foods. In light of all the nutrition science that's come out, this is what it's all coming down to. Can you get people to change these habits? You need to be a profound support system. You need to be there for them all the time. Yes, we have boundaries, don't call me at 4 a.m., but you need to sort of be there to address them either with data, like, how much of this supplement should I be taking, or emotional support. Because again, it's as much a psychological project now as it is a scientific project. So you just need to be an emotional cheerleader to a certain extent. So we've seen the whole industry blossom from the 1700s on up to today. The information's not going to stop coming. It's going to, more research is going to be done, and we're going to learn more and more and more. I look forward to reading your book, right, and seeing what that has to say. But the basic principles don't change. Get them to eat slowly, get them to manage stress, get them to manage their own food intake. These are the real pearls, the real gems to take away. With that, I thank you for your time. Appreciate it.